Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2021 for your race review for the Spanish Grand Prix. The Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya normally gives us a bit of a stinker, but today's race, filled with intrigue, filled with strategy, went right down to the wire. Another titanic battle between our championship challengers, but as always, spoiler warning for today's Grand Prix. And just before we get to your race result, here is your grid for today's race. Claiming his 100th pole position in his Formula 1 career, a ridiculous statistic, Lewis Hamilton lined up alongside championship challenger Max Verstappen on the front row. Valtteri Bottas was in third place with the first Ferrari of Leclerc, a great job on Saturday, P4. Frenchman Esteban Ocon was P5 with Carlos Sainz in 6th place in behind his teammates. The first McLaren of Daniel Ricciardo in 7th with Sergio Perez, a really disappointing Saturday. What can he do from 8th on the grid? Lando Norris for the first time in 2021 would not start the race in 7th place and would start just in behind teammate Ricciardo with home hero Fernando Alonso P10. For the first time in 2021, neither Aston Martin could make it through to Q3, with Lance Stroll leading Pierre Gasly on row 6 with Vettel in front of Giovinazzi on row 7. George Russell made it through the Q2 again this season, starting 15th with a disappointing 16th for Yuki Tsunoda. Raikkonen and Schumacher on row 9 feels like the mid-2000s all over again, with Latifi and Mazepin your grid. And with your spoiler warning now out of the way, here is your result for today's race. Win number 98 in his Formula 1 career, but it certainly wasn't an easy ride for the 7-time world champion, with Verstappen leading the Grand Prix for the majority of the race, both of them locked into an epic strategic battle from lights to flag. A great race today, and though Hamilton came away with victory, Verstappen able to steal that fastest lap point with just a handful of laps to go. Valtteri Bottas struggled to match the pace of the top two and would round out your podium, but a great drive from the Ferrari of Leclerc would see him finish 4th, his best result of the season. In 5th place was Sergio Perez, who had a great battle all day long with Daniel Ricciardo, just being able to beat the Australian, but unable to catch the Ferrari of Leclerc. Ricciardo finally got a good result under his belt, finishing in front of the former McLaren man Carlos Sainz, who finished in front of his former teammate Lando Norris. Norris's first time not finishing in the top 5 in 2021, but in front of Ocon, who really struggled with the tyres today. And the pace we were hoping for from Alpine never really came to the forefront. Pierre Gasly, P10, your final point scorer for the Spanish Grand Prix. Lance Stroll started 11th and sadly for him finished 11th, unable to really put an impact on that top 10, but a great fight in the closing stages with Gasly, Stroll, Raikkonen, Vettel, Russell, Alonso, Giovinazzi, everyone getting involved, dicing it out for the points. Gasly was eventually able to prevail over that other group of cars, but Stroll, Vettel on that alternate strategy, unable to make any inroads on the top 10. Raikkonen was able to split the two Aston Martins in 12th place, a rogue strategy from 17th on the grid, one of the very few cars to try a one-stop along with Esteban Ocon, but unable to just sneak into the points. Russell seemed so close with just 10 laps to go, was half a second away from his first points, but those tyres fell off the cliff in the closing stages and succumbed to that group of cars pushing for points. Giovinazzi so unlucky with tyres early on, he lost out to teammate through the safety car and was unable to recover. Latifi gets his best result in 2021 with a 16th place, moving him up a place in the drivers' standings, with Alonso having to do a late pit stop with those tyres almost coming to a puncture. Schumacher and Mazepin, the two Haas cars, a difficult day for them, 18th and 19th, your two final finishes for today's Grand Prix, with Yuki Tsunoda your only DNF in P20. And with your results now out of the way, let's move over to the good bit, your race analysis, because though the early stages of this race seemed to be a bit of a quiet one and we were starting to think, it's traditional Barcelona, we never really get overtaking, we never really get any kind of intrigue, the second half of this race just came alive with action almost from P1 all the way down to P20. Cars scrapping it out for those final points. Overtakes, a part of the circuit we never see overtakes. And of course, the huge story, the huge point of intrigue from today's race, the fight for the lead. Those two, once again, Hamilton versus Verstappen. Hamilton able to come out on top. But as I mentioned earlier, Verstappen didn't make it easy for him, with the Flying Dutchman taking the lead into turn 1 in a move very reminiscent of what we saw at Imola. Max getting the elbows out, being really forceful, knowing he had to make that move if he wanted any chance of winning today's race. Hamilton had to back out, concede the place to Verstappen, and though in that first stint was about a second hovering on the edge of DRS from the Flying Dutchman, was never able to get a move. Well, as the pit stop started to loom, Hamilton was closing, finally was in half a second, and it finally looked like he could make a move into turn 1. But just before he was able to do so, Red Bull striked Verstappen into the pits on his own accord. A late pit stop call for him. Luckily, they were able to get the tyres out. It was a slightly slower stop than we're used to from Red Bull, and that did give Mercedes a great opportunity to pit Hamilton and bring him out in front. Well, actually, they didn't do that. They played their cards very differently in today's race, with Hamilton going that little bit longer, stopping that little bit later, eventually doing a 2-stop, catching Red Bull off guard, and with Valtteri Bottas stuck in Verstappen's pit window, Red Bull were almost forced into a corner where if they stopped Verstappen, they would have relinquished the lead to Bottas, also would have still been under threat from Lewis Hamilton, and at the time for them, they perceived that to be way too big of a risk. Consequently though, those few laps where they were deciding whether the risk was worth it or not, Hamilton was able to close in on Verstappen. Hamilton also passed Bottas on the road as well. Though team orders were in effect, it doesn't look like Valtteri was too keen on making that become a reality. However, a really good move from Hamilton up the inside of turn 10 saw him move closer to Max Verstappen. There was an opportunity at that stage for Red Bull to stop Verstappen, put him on the soft tyres compared to Hamilton's mediums, but again, they took the gamble of keeping Verstappen out, hoping those tyres would last, or almost hoping Hamilton's tyres would also fall off a cliff, because they weren't new medium tyres, but they were still comfortably newer than that of Verstappen. And for Red Bull, the tyres not only fell off a cliff, Hamilton's pace was relentless, closing Verstappen down. It was estimated it would be on the last couple of laps. It was actually with 6 laps to go. An easy move for Lewis down into turn 1 around the outside of Max Verstappen, just like we saw in Hungary 2019. Hamilton off into the distance, his 3rd victory of the season, with Verstappen doing a late pit stop and having to concede with a fastest lap and 2nd place. And with Valtteri Bottas in 3rd, though he tried his best to keep Lewis Hamilton behind despite team orders, a little bit risky from Valtteri there, but showing that little bit of fire on a weekend where his pace wasn't quite on the lead too, I think we're once again reminded why it's so important to have 2 cars, 2 drivers comfortable and fighting at the front, because Mercedes had so many options of strategy today, so many occasions we saw Red Bull forced into a corner, forced into a situation that was a lose-lose, and though many people will point out Red Bull were very conservative today, didn't take enough risks, they knew what happened in Hungary 2019, but just like in Hungary 2019, that second Red Bull car was nowhere near the front. They were stuck on their own with that one car, and just like Hungary 2019, a few too many laps cost them the win today. They should have gone more aggressive. They will know that for the rest of the season. And for a team that haven't been in a championship fight since 2013, they're going to learn super quickly that these little mistakes, though they seem insignificant now, over the course of a season, it's why Mercedes, it's why Lewis Hamilton are such a ridiculously good combination. And what's strange for Red Bull is that Sergio Perez today had an okay race, didn't he? A great move on Daniel Ricciardo round the outside of turn 1. Lovely little move on the Australian driver. But 5th place. not in that fight for the lead. It's not what Red Bull need, but I do find it really hard to blame Sergio Perez. We know how good this driver is. Last season, 4th place in a Racing Point. We know this man has speed. He won a race in a Racing Point. So where has that pace gone? You could easily point to the fact that Checo seems to be the driver that has struggled most with his change of environment in 2021. But we've seen for years now that second Red Bull car, for whatever reason, seems to be cursed really, but whatever reason, is not on the level of Max Verstappen. And once again we circle back to this question, is this Max Verstappen is just so good? Or is this a problem where Red Bull focus so much on one driver, they leave the other behind? And again, when we're talking about a World Championship fight, it's days like today when you don't have two cars fighting at the front that are going to cost you. So Checo, though we know how good he is, fortunes are going to have to turn around, because next time out in Monaco, expect Red Bull to be the team to beat. Perez will want to be 4th place at minimum, but aiming for a podium if he wants to keep his chances of any sort of championship fight, and also Red Bull's chances of a Constructors' Championship fight intact for the rest of the season. But away from those top 2 teams, were 8 more teams, and we've been going for quite a while now, so let's move on to our midfield, which once again was so tight, so compact, and gave us just another really good battle. Charles Leclerc, 4th place today, and just another really strong drive in that Ferrari, fending off Valtteri Bottas after making a stunning move around the outside of turn 3, once again proving his ability in a Formula 1 car, and Bottas unable to really do anything in the opening stages. But Ferrari tried something different, a little bit further on the strategy, trying to make those tyres last, which on both cars, a massive improvement today compared to Portimao. I think was helped out by the 2-stop strategy, but nevertheless, Leclerc, even though he lost a chance of a podium, was miles in front of the rest of the midfield, 9 seconds in front of Sergio Perez. Another really good drive. And Carlos Sainz, it seemed to all come done on that opening lap. Started 6th, finished 7th. More points for Ferrari, and I think once again just showing everyone, first of all, how good and how consistent he is, scoring in every single of his home Grand Prix, but also the fact he seems to be getting used to that Ferrari quicker than any other of the newbies have at their new team. So a great day for Maranello and for Ferrari. For McLaren, a mixed bag again, because whereas normally this year we've said Lando Norris, stunning in the midfield, Ricciardo, a bit of work to do, it was almost the other way round today, with Danny Ric finally getting on top of that car. Lando struggling a little bit more. 9th in qualifying, was able to get up to 8th in the closing stages of the race, overtaking Esteban Ocon. But Danny Ric really held his own at the front of the midfield, with Leclerc was fending off one of the top teams, this case Sergio Perez, eventually got overtaken in the closing stages. But it's nice to see Danny Ric comfortable in that car. And overall this weekend, it's been a big step forward compared to his first 3 races in Papaya. A team that'll probably be a little bit frustrated and disappointed with today's result is Alpine. 9th for Esteban Ocon after a great qualifying yesterday. A 1-stop strategy, the same as Fernando Alonso, his teammate, really hurt him. Was able to hold on to 9th, almost losing out to Pierre Gasly on the line. Just held on, but what could have been today? And if only they'd have gone with the 2-stop like everyone else, I think they'd have scored pretty big. They were in that fight with Carlos Sainz and Norris and wasn't a million miles away from Perez and Daniel Ricciardo. And though Ocon will feel like today, in reality, was a missed opportunity, so will Fernando Alonso, so much more than Esteban Ocon. Alonso was fighting in that top 10, kind of in that back group with the likes of Pierre Gasly, Lance Stroll, Sebastian Vettel, even Kimi Raikkonen at the end of the race. They tried the 1-stop, but it just didn't work. Tyres falling off a cliff, Fernando plummeting out of the points. They had to do a stop really late on to try and compensate, but finished the race in 17th behind both Williams, only in front of the 2 Haas cars. So a real missed opportunity for Alpine today. A similar kind of vibe with AlphaTauri. they've come away with a point, which, considering the start of today's race with Yuki Tsunoda retiring less than 15 laps into the Grand Prix, and Gasly getting a 5-second penalty for starting out of his grid box. But actually, Gasly, a really strong recovery drive, ends up with a point, had a great fight with Sebastian Vettel on multiple occasions, had a ding-dong with Lance Stroll, Kimi Raikkonen, Alonso on those final few laps of carnage in the midfield, and really just proving again that even in difficult situations, Gasly is a driver capable of making the most of it, capable of scoring points, and I think today proves he really is pretty good. For Aston Martin, it's a similar story to what it's been all year long. It's just not quite good enough. Missing out on points today, only just 11th and 13th for their two boys. Lance Stroll made a great move on Fernando Alonso round the outside of turn 4 to get the inside of turn 5. Also had a battle with Alonso through turn 1. A little bit of contact between the pair of them meant Stroll had to go wide over the curbing. No penalty because he was forced wide and didn't go wide on his own accord. It's nice to see the progression from Stroll, even in a car that isn't fantastic. Not only is he putting in some pretty solid race performances, but at that exact corner 2 years ago, contact with Norris saw both of them out of the race. So there is progression with Stroll, and so far, he's had a pretty okay start to the season. For Seb Vettel, I think this weekend is another improvement, though it's no points, though it's not Q3. I think he's been more consistent than he was last year, and actually the fact he's willing to get his elbows out, fight some of these guys, is really nice to see. A little bit more time's needed before results are really going to get anywhere near Aston want to be, and I do think they will be one of the early teams to swap to 2022, so keep an eye out for that. But there really is no hiding. It's been a tough start to the season and another race to forget for the Aston Martin squad. Alfa Romeo saw a day of two halves, didn't they, with Raikkonen from 17th to 12th, the only driver to not start on the soft tyres. A one-stop strategy saw Kimi almost score the team's first official points of the 2021 season, but was just unable to sneak in the closing stages. But a great race nonetheless. However, on the other side of the garage, what does poor Antonio Giovinazzi need to do to just catch a break? I really feel for him, because today, for the first time in what I think is Formula 1 history, certainly since I've been watching, Antonio got a puncture before the tyres were even on the car. How unlucky can you be? A 50-second pit stop saw him plummet way out of the order, way out of proceedings, behind the Haas cars, behind the Williams cars. That did a stop that put pay to his day almost instantly. Really unlucky after another really good qualifying on Saturday. But on the subject of Williams, it was really nice to see a team that was struggling so much a few years ago today with so much confidence, trying something different, doing the two-stop double stack with both of their cars, almost prevailing with Russell half a second off points. Half a second off points. Please, half a second. With just 10 laps to go. It's going to come. That chassis is much better this year. And on the track where they didn't think they'd be any good this weekend, to be that close is a really good sign for this team. And with Latifi, nice and racy again, plenty of overtakes for him as well as George. It's no points, but it's not a bad race day. And our final team, Haas, a quiet day. 18th and 19th, not really a lot more they could do. Mick Schumacher again building that experience, not making mistakes, miles in front of his teammate. And for Nikita Mazepin, who was caught up in a bit of kerfuffle with blue flags and Lewis Hamilton, though the onboards that have been floating around doesn't really look like he's in the way, but he was lapped twice, so I'm not 100% sure which time that was. But an improvement for Nikita, though again he was miles off. There were a few mistakes. No spins in the race for the first time in his career. It's an improvement. But Mick Schumacher, very much the team leader and the better of the two by quite a margin at this stage of the season. But just before we go, let's take a quick look at your drivers and constructors standings, race rating and the big one, driver of the day. Lewis Hamilton extends his lead at the top of the standings to 14 points over Max Verstappen, with Valtteri Bottas finally moving into the top 3, 6 in front of Lando Norris, who's 1 in front of Charles Leclerc. It's Mexican Sergio Perez in P6 on 32 points in front of Ricciardo and Sainz, and the 2 Frenchmen, Ocon and Gasly, your top 10. The bottom half of the field is almost the exact same as last time out, with Stroll in front of Alonso and rookie Yuki Tsunoda, the 2 Alfa Romeos of Raikkonen and Giovinazzi 14 and 15, Vettel is 16, Russell, Schumacher, Latifi and Mazepin, your field. And in the Constructors, Mercedes extend their advantage over challengers Red Bull Racing, but it's not over yet. McLaren and Ferrari are comfortably in front of the 15 point of Alpine, AlphaTauri are on 10, Aston Martin are on 5, Alfa Romeo, Williams and Haas all yet to score. I really enjoyed this race, especially for a Spanish Grand Prix, so my race rating, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Let me know yours in the comment section below. And my driver of the day, yesterday I gave it to Esteban Ocon. Today I'm giving it to Charles Leclerc, king of the midfield for today's race. But my driver of the weekend, a stunning race, could have been driver of the day, could have been qualifying driver of the day, 100 poles, a ridiculously good win in performance on Sunday, has to be Lewis Hamilton. Let me know yours in the comments section down below, but that is it from me here in Spain. I'll be back this week for your review of the Monaco E-Prix, and in a few weeks time we will be returning to Monaco again with Formula 1 back on the road. Thank you all very much for watching. If you are new, feel free to subscribe, and I hope to see you all in the next one.